This Let's Edit with Media Composer tutorial is brought to you by VideoGuys.com, the leading reseller of video editing and production equipment for more than 25 years. And by Boris Effects, a leading developer of visual effect plugins, titling, video editing, and workflow tools for broadcast, post-production, and film professionals. Hey everyone, Kevin P McAuliffe here, and I am back again with another Let's Edit with Avid Media Composer tutorial. And in this lesson, we're going to talk about that clip that I teased on the Avid Editors of Facebook, where I showed you how to create a night shot from some daytime footage. And in this tutorial, I'm going to be using some great effects from both Boris Continuum Complete and GenArt Sapphire, with a little bit of help from Photoshop to get in and to create the element that you see in front of you very quickly and very easily. Now, I always see people posting questions, how do I do day for night shots or night for day shots? I hope in this lesson you're going to see how with a little bit of thinking, you can create this look lightning quick. Now, before we go on, I want to remind you that these tutorials are designed to get in and take a very in-depth look at very specific aspects of editing inside of Avid Media Composer. But sometimes you just need to get the information and get yourself up and running lightning fast. Well, if that's the case, head on over and check out my Mac Pro video training series on Media Composer, where lesson 1 will get you up and running in Media Composer in about an hour. All right, so let's Command or Alt and Tab into Avid Media Composer. And the first thing we need is a clip to work with. And this clip does come to us, as always, courtesy of our friends at Artbeats. And if you're looking for this clip plus thousands and thousands more, you can check them out at artbeats.com. Now, I'm just going to take about 5 seconds of this shot. So we'll just go plus 5 seconds. I'll come back 1 frame so that we have an even 5 seconds. I'm just going to drop this into our timeline. Doesn't matter if it's an insert or an overwrite edit, because we don't have any clips in our current timeline. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our night from day shot. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create the matte element. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add in sort of our icing on the cake, or our sort of our bells and whistles, which is going to be the night sky and the Luna effect. So let's create our day for night shot, okay? Or actually our night shot from our day footage. So the first effect that I'm going to use, I'm going to call up the effects palette, Command or Control and 8, depending on the platform you're working on. Let's punch in HSL. HSL, if you're not familiar with that terminology, hue, saturation, and lightness, one of the BCC effects inside of the BCC color and tone category. Let's take the effect, we're going to drag it and drop it down onto our shot. And one thing that's important when you're creating night shots from day footage is that, keep in mind, at night it always seems as though everything has had a lot of the color pulled out of it. Nothing ever really looks as vibrant as it does during the day. So what we want to do is just take a little bit of the vibrance out of this shot by coming in and just pulling. I'm going to pull about 30% of the saturation out of this shot. Something like that. I think that's pretty good. Now again, you can get in and sort of tailor this however you want when you're creating your night from day footage shot, okay? The next effect that we're going to use is another one that I love, which is BCC Levels, okay? We're going to use the real-time version of BCC Levels right here, not the obsolete one, because that one is a blue dot non-real-time effect. We're going to hold Option or Alt when we drag this down onto our shot. And let's get in. I'm just going to put the input black to sort of crush the blacks in our rock somewhere about here, I think is good. Let's come down to our output white. We're just going to drag that right down probably to about there. And that's looking pretty darn good. Just like that. Okay, now one thing that's also important to keep in mind, you'll notice that when we talked about originally doing the desaturation, that's sort of a common night technique. Well, another common night technique is to add a little bit of blue to the footage. That always sort of gives it that night feeling. And I'm going to go to one of my go-to effects inside of BCC. I have a couple go-to effects. One is the linear luma key effect. I probably use that effect in just about every project I work on. Another great effect is BCC color balance. Okay, I'm just going to type in color bal, and there is our 2 effects. Again, remember, obsolete versus real time. We want the real time version. I'm going to, again, Option or Alt, drag that down onto our shot. We're going to head on over to the effects editor, and we want to adjust the blue balance of our shot. And I'm going to put it right about there. I think that's pretty good. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually going to take this shot and I'm going to mix it down. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, Kev, don't mix it down because then you can't come in and change it. To be honest, I'm going to be altering that mix down, and I already have my original elements right here, so I don't really need to worry about having to go back and alter anything because I always have access to it with this layer here. So again, what we're going to do is head up to timeline. We're going to come down to mix down video, and I'm just going to stick it into the night from day bin. I'm going to say okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this element background. Okay. You're going to see where we're going to go with that background in just a second. Now, the next thing we're going to need to do is to create our matte element. So let's do that. What I'm going to do, new video layer, Command or Control and Y on the keyboard. I'm going to take our original shot and just drop it in. I'm going to head back to that BCC levels effect. I'm going to take that effect. We're going to drag it and drop it down onto our shot. And I'm going to take this shot about 90% of the way to where I need it to go to. And I'm going to use Photoshop to get it the rest of the way there. Now, this is a situation where a lot of people say to me, well, Kev, why don't you just use Mocha to create the look that you want to create, or to create the mask for what you're going to be doing from this point forward? And the reason is that there is a lot of detail in the trees. Okay? And Mocha would be so simple to use just to get in and trace the rock out. But once we get with this detail in here, you're going to see why I'm using the technique that I'm using. What I'm going to do is, again, just crush the blacks a little bit. And we're going to bring our whites right the way up. We need to crush those blacks a lot, kind of like that. Okay. And let's just bring the whites up a little bit. I don't want to bring it up too much because I'm kind of happy with what's going on up here with the outline that's happening around that tree. Now, to give you an idea of what's actually happening here, there's the before, there's the after. Okay. So let's take this shot now and we're going to export it. I'm just going to mark an in and out point. Let's step out of effects mode. Just mark an in and out point right here. We're going to right click, say export to the desktop. We'll call this format. It's a JPEG. I'm just going to say save, and we're going to Command or Alt and Tab into Adobe's Photoshop. Now, why Photoshop? Photoshop because just about every Media Composer editor out there, doesn't matter how long you've been editing for, has Photoshop on their system. Doesn't matter if it's the newest version, the oldest version, this technique will work in no matter which version of Photoshop you happen to be running. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is I want to come in and remove any of the color information from this shot. So I'm going to come up to Image, I'm going to come down to Mode, and I'm going to select Grayscale. I'm just going to discard all the color information, which is fine. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove all this waves and anything that we have in here that we know we're just going to want to have part of the actual background element, or this is actually going to be the foreground element. So let's just use our lasso tool. And I'm going to be very rough with this because we can get in and fine tune this as much as we need to when we're done this. Okay. That's pretty good, I think. And again, based on what you're doing, you can be as precise or as liberal as you want to be here. I'm just going to be pretty easy going. That's pretty darn close. Now we just need to do a little bit of adjustment to the sky up here. I'm just going to grab it like such, come down around here. Again, I'm not going to worry about being too exceptionally precise, but if you had more time, you could do this however you like. Okay, and we just got one more on the other side. We'll fill this with white. Okay, and you'll see that we got a little bit of the sky happening here that's not quite as white as it needs to be, but don't worry, we'll fix that in just a second. Because one thing I love about Photoshop is we can go back to that great levels effect, much like we had in BCC, that we don't have access to as a standard effect inside of Media Composer. Now, one thing that I did want to mention off the top, and I'm going to mention it now, is that many editors are probably saying, Kev, you know what? I could create this inside of Media Composer using the standard color correction effect, and you know what? You might be able to get it part of the way there, but you wouldn't be able to get it all the way there. And there's a very specific reason why I'm doing it this way. And of course, you gotta wait till the end to find out. Now, I want to make sure that I just deselect so that we're not selecting anything, so that when we come back to our image and we come down to adjustments and we come to levels, we'll be doing this to the entire shot here. Now, what's great about this is, let me just show you this here. I just want to pull our levels up. You'll see where I actually went in and did that very rough trace. So we're going to want to make sure that we get rid of that. By simply crushing the blacks back down, we're just going to bring our whites right up so that what we've now created is our very own matte key of this. The rocks, this basically the seashore shot. So let's just save this out. Now that's a lot of S's to say in there at one time. Let's save this right over top of the element that we had before. And I'm going to Command or Alt and Tab back into Media Composer. And once there, let's just close the effects palette here. I'm just going to come in. We're going to import this matte. And inside of our options, I'm just going to make sure that we're scaling from full range to legal range. I'm just going to deselect the alpha channel. I'll say OK. And with our new matte element in here, what we're going to need to do is to first of all remove this element here. And let's create a couple more video tracks. And you'll see why in just a second. The first thing I'm going to do is to bring our element that has all of our effects on it up to V3. And what we're going to want to do is to take that mix down that we're going to use for the background, and we're going to do just that. We're going to place it in the background. Now, I probably don't need one of those video layers here, so let's actually just delete V4. Because we could probably do this with just 3 layers. And the next thing we're going to want to do is to take our matte element, and we're just going to take it, we're going to drop it onto V3 like such. And let's come to one of my oldest friends, one of my oldest effects that I still use to this day, probably from way back from version 5.5 of Media Composer. Now I'm talking 5.5 from about 20 years ago, and that's inside the key category, and that's the matte key effect. We're just going to drag it and drop it down onto our shot, and you'll see now that what's happened if I turn the background element off here by simply muting the clip is we now have this element completely keyable. Okay. Now what we're going to do with our background, because I want to make sure that the background is isolated, is that when we unmute this clip, I'm just going to come in and I'm going to adjust the hue, saturation, lightness again. Okay, and all I want to do is just bring that lightness down a little bit. Okay, just kind of like that. Okay, just so that our background is a little bit darker. Okay, now let's just actually, I think what I'm going to do is just make it a little bit darker, just so we get a perfect. Okay, I want to make sure it's not completely disappeared. That's looking good right about there. Because once I have that background a lot darker, what I now want to do is come back to the effects palette, and I'm going to type in S_night sky, and I'm going to take the night sky effect and I'm going to drag it and drop it down onto my shot. And you'll see that by doing that, we now have illuminated the night sky with our stars. Okay. Now we can bring the stars brightness down just a little bit if we wanted to. We can get in and really tweak this however we want. We can get in and actually set the time of, the year, the month, the day. We have so many different parameters that we can adjust inside this one effect. Okay. Now you'll see that the background brightness is set to 1. We could just bring that right down if we wanted to sort of put us where we were before, kind of about there. Okay, I think that's looking good and more representative of a night sky. Now we are missing something, and this was something that a lot of people complained about when I posted this on YouTube, and it was the moon. And they were complaining that the moon was too big and it didn't really look realistic. But the whole point of this is, this is something that you can get in and make it as realistic or as visual effecty, if you want to put it that way, as you want. And what we're going to do is we're going to come to another fantastic Sapphire effect, S Luna. Okay, and the one thing you're going to notice about these Sapphire effects, especially if you're new to Sapphire, is the level of realism these effects have. Like this night sky looks fantastic, but check this out again by holding Option or Alt and dragging this down onto our shot. There's the moon. Now keep in mind the moon's looking a little bit big there. Okay, I'm just going to reposition the moon right dead in the middle of the screen just so we can get it looking the way that we want. Then we'll place it where we want. Okay, now I'm going to set the lunar phase to be 180 just so we can see the entire moon. Now the moon, it's a little bit too big, so let's put this at about 0.15. Maybe even a little bit smaller. If I was going for sort of that unrealistic moon look, I might leave it at that. Let's go with sort of a 0.095. I think that's pretty good just like that. Now, one thing that I also like with my moon is I like them to glow. So we're just going to add a lot of glow to this. And I'm just going to bring the threshold. Let's adjust the threshold here. There we go. I think that's looking pretty good just like that. And I could just adjust the glow size just to make it a little bit bigger. Okay. And this is sort of how I like my moons to look here. Very glowy. And what's very cool now about this element is the fact that once we have it looking the way that we want, just like that, what we can now do, because we've created this as a matte element, we can really place this wherever we want to go. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn off the foreground layer, and you can actually see what's happening with the background. And what we could do if we wanted to is we could take the moon and just have it peeking out over top of the rocks right here. So this way when we add the foreground element back in, you can see that it just gives the shot just that little bit extra layer of realism. And because we were so detailed when we went and created that matte by getting and using the levels to really separate the foreground and the background, what we could even do if we wanted to is to step back into the Luna effect, and I could even take it and place it behind the trees over here so that it's just peeking out over top of the mountain, and you can even see it right through the trees just like that, to give this shot just that extra little layer of realism. Now, let's answer the question that I sort of posed before. Why would I do this using BCC and Sapphire as opposed to doing this with the color correction tools? Now, obviously, some of the stuff we can't do with the color correction tools, like the night sky, like the moon. But when getting in and doing things like changing the color to be a little bit of blue, to getting in and doing our sort of day for night look, why did I use BCC and not use the built-in color correction tools? Well, here's why. I'm going to step back into effects mode, and I'm going to point out to you that at any point in this entire process, I could start saving presets of all of these different effects. So this way I can take this look and I can transfer it in a matter of minutes to Adobe's After Effects, to, whether it's DaVinci's Resolve, to any application that supports BCC as an effects package. I can take these presets, send them right across to those applications, and I can open them and recreate this look, like I said, in a matter of minutes. Now, as we're wrapping up, I want to remind you that if you're looking for great deals on Avid Media Composer software licenses, subscriptions, and upgrades, use coupon code MC101 for 5% off any purchase at videoguys.com. MC101 is going to be a coupon code that you're going to love because the great team at Boris FX is offering a 10% discount on BCC 10 AVX or multi-host licenses, full or upgrades, again using the coupon code MC101. And finally, don't forget that if you have any questions, you have any comments, or you have any tutorial requests, you can send them to me at kevinpmcauliffe@gmail.com. This has been Kevin P. McAuliffe. Thanks a lot for watching.